We are very blessed to have Monsieur Hugues Simard this morning with us. A little bit about myself first, if you'll allow me. I'm a senior manager with the M&A advisory team of Deloitte in Montreal. And again, we are lucky enough to have Monsieur Hugues Simard with us today. Monsieur Simard is Chief Financial Officer of Quebecor since January 2019. Quebecor, as probably most of you know, is the fourth largest telecommunication service provider in Canada, and a group that also includes broad media production and distribution activities. Over a period of nearly 20 years, from 1998 to 2017, Monsieur Simard occupied a series of key positions within Quebecor and its subsidiaries, including Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of Videotron from 2014 to 2017, Senior Vice President, Development and Strategy of Quebecor Media, and Vice President, Finance and Chief Financial Officer of Sun Media Corporation from 2007 to 2014. One of his key achievements during that time was the creation of the QMI agency, an integrated news agency, in 2009, and the organization and implementation of QMI Sales, an integrated sales force for the Ontario Corporation, in 2007. Between 2017 and his return to Quebecor, Hugues Simard was Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of Indigo Books and Music Incorporated in Toronto. He holds an MBA from Harvard Business School and a bachelor's degree in Applied Sciences and Engineering degree from the University of Toronto. So again, thank you very much for being here, Hugues, this morning. I hope everything is well on your side.
Well, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour, François. I must comment, it always makes me feel old when somebody goes through the numerous things that we've done for many, many years. But anyway, it was indeed quite an interesting parcours throughout the various positions throughout Quebecor. So, you know, I know we're talking finance this morning, then we're talking to a finance auditoire, but as you can see, operations is really a very important part of our jobs here at Quebecor, because we are fundamentally operators, you know, from the media side all the way to the telco. And finance for us is very much an operational form of efficiency. So any questions that we can cover on that front, I'll be more than happy to comment on, for sure.
Of course, thank you very much for that, Hugues. And this introduces our subject, but before we go into this, we welcome your question during the discussion today. If you could please write or type your discussions in the discussion segment or in the discussion bucket. And as we move along, we'll try our best to touch on those questions during the discussion. And we also will have a Q&A at the end of the session. So basically, the subjects that we are to cover this morning are first, the Canadian telco market. So a discussion about how COVID impacted the market, for example, and notwithstanding COVID, what are the main challenges for that market? Secondly, we'll cover the evolution of technologies and their impact on the telco as much as possible. Obviously, not being necessarily a technology specialist, but his many positions within Videotron Quebecor gave him an understanding of those issues that we'll welcome this morning. Thirdly, evolution of content strategies for telcos, which is often a key aspect. And lastly, we'll briefly touch on what's next for Quebecor as much as possible, again, followed by a Q&A. So hope that works for everybody. Anyway, it's not a negotiation, so you're going to have to stick with us. So first subject, and thanks again, Hugues, for taking the time, the Canadian telco market. So broadly, Hugues, from your standpoint, with the impact of COVID, what were the main issue or the main impact that affected the Canadian telco market from your standpoint?
Well, the obvious impacts, from COVID are obviously on the revenue side. Roaming revenues are an important part of all telcos, around the world. And of course, as people aren't traveling anymore, we don't get these roaming revenues on which we make very good margins for obvious reasons. There are certain other data cap overages and all these overage type revenues also that during COVID have been set aside as for a long time we did not charge. Like most other telcos, we were all pretty much aligned on that front to ensure that people could comfortably and reliably work from home, and with the children being at home as well. Certainly in the first phases of the pandemic, to make sure that people had all the technology and the power possible to do their work. So I mean, so there are obvious revenue streams that we did not benefit from and have not benefited from since the beginning of the pandemic. But I think the most important impacts, which will be lasting in our mind, was how it became more obvious to everybody and more clear the importance of very reliable, very solid, and very performing networks. We had been arguing for many years that we have to be careful on the telco front. And there's many models have been tried around the world, in Europe and in Asia and in other countries, where certain incumbents or certain network operators were forced to share their networks with new arrivals and new telcos. Of course, with the logic being that it would increase competition and bring prices down, which it has in many markets. But there needs to be a balance, and the important balance, I think, has been reached in Canada and became very obvious during the pandemic, when we saw that overnight, with people having to shift from their office to their home to do their work, and with, as I said, children more and more being at home, having to study from home, and also having to to consume all of their content, all of their video content and other internet protocol content through their home connections. It was a bit of a challenge to make sure that the networks were reliable, that they were strong enough, and that they could deliver the performance, and they did. I think it became clear that this was not just posturing, on the part of many telcos, when we said that we need to be in a fair competitive environment that allows us to invest and to continue to invest heavily in these networks. One of the topics that we'll get into in more details is obviously technology, and technology continually advances and continually changes, so you need to obviously, upgrade and keep improving your networks and keeping up with the new technology. But even before that, I think it's important to make sure that the networks are maintained and are reliable and are able to deliver the performance and the depth that is needed by everybody.
Yeah.
And we saw some clear examples around the world where networks were under significant pressure, and some of them failed a lot more often. In Canada, I think we proved that we have a good way of managing this. And we'll get into the regulatory questions, I'm sure, later. But I think we're on the right path on this one, on that one.
That's quite interesting. So basically, you mentioned that from the COVID crisis or the current environment, you did have at least partially a hit on the revenue side. You mentioned the roaming fees that were not part of your revenue generation for the last year. You also mentioning the importance of continuous investment and adapting to the new normal, like people staying home. How much of an importance did that take in terms of your cost structure within the given environment currently?
Actually, it was we were, and that came out very, very clearly. We were set up the right way, and I think it did not necessarily. I mean, there were some costs. Our cost structures did get in some areas a little heavier in terms of maintenance, in terms of making sure that on the network side more specifically. But then there were other areas where the cost structure really got lightened up a little bit, and I'm referring to our retail network closed for many months. So of course that is a significant source of source of cost for us, which for many months was not there. So you know what, all in all, I think we have to be fair. I mean, on the cost structure, I think there were puts and takes. I don't think it added anything huge on the cost side. It did take some revenues out, and it did, as I said, make us focus on prioritization of investments and of capital investments going forward.
Yeah. Okay, very interesting. And still with the COVID, but moving forward and try to get rid of that. What are the key takeaways you think that will result from the COVID crisis and that will carry over in the next few years? For example, you mentioned working from home and the impact that this has on the networks, for example.
Yeah, I think for us, certainly, it meant a significant rebalance and significant planning or adaptation. I was going to say replanning, which is probably too strong of a word, but a rebalancing of our planning going forward in terms of ensuring that that our networks are performant. You have to understand that the way we manage networks is always for peaks, or has traditionally been for, and continues up to a point to be for peaks. You have to make sure that at any point in time when the peaks are hit in terms of demand, that you can provide that service. So historically, the peaks were always late afternoon to early evening, when people got, so they were, there's the B2B demand during the day, but it tends to be fairly flat. And then at the end of the day, people start, consuming more content and use the internet more. So there, and the wireless. So there's always a peak from late after. There was always a peak from late afternoon to early evening. These things have been flattened by the COVID, and that will probably last. So we had to just rebalance our networks to make sure that we adapted to that. As you said, we do believe that there will be a lasting effect in terms of people not coming back 100% to the office. Not 5 days a week. We are.
I sure hope not.
Well, I think some people may hope to come back at least a little bit, and I think that there may be differing views on that. But I think at the end of the day, there'll be a balance. I think at the beginning, I think people were saying, "Oh, this is, it's workable to work 100% from home." I think it will probably end up somewhere in the middle. I know the way we are planning here at Quebecor for our employees is sort of a split week between allowing people, of course, to work from home, which allows them some flexibility. And also having having them in the office 2 or 3 days a week, which obviously demands a reallocation of space, will lead to significant reduction, to be quite honest, because if people are only in the office 2 or 3 days a week, clearly you don't need the footprint or the floor space that you did when people were here all the time. And it's also, I think, lasting will be the new ways. I mean, now we operate call centers from from a distance, which wouldn't have been thinkable only a few years ago. And you know what? In many ways, we are more efficient. So it does create some stress in terms of the social side of work, which is difficult to at this point to ensure. But again, I think we'll get to a balance over the next few months, which I think will bring back some of that group dynamic, in that not only social but training and all of these exchanges that are very important within our work group. So I think we'll get to some equilibrium, but I think it's very clear that we will work in a very different way going forward than we did pre-pandemic. And you know what? I think it's a good thing. I think we'll be just as efficient, if not more, and it'll allow flexibility on both sides. So I think it's a good thing.
Very interesting, especially when you mentioned that you really saw the demand curve flatten and stay fairly high, I bet, in terms of household consumption of your services. Let's stick with the Canadian market for just a minute or two. And when you mentioned, we talked about COVID, but if we look at the environment, notwithstanding COVID, what would be the main challenges affecting the industry, and why, from your standpoint? Is it regulation, technology evolution, economic cycles, expectations of inflation coming up that could affect your capacity to invest in the infrastructures? What are the key elements from your standpoint?
I think it's a little bit of many of the things you're pointing out. I think the regulatory environment is huge. I mean, we are in a comparatively regulated industry, and how that regulation evolves is going to have a huge impact on how we manage our companies and how we can grow our companies and how successful we'll be. On the two main fronts of regulation right now is, on the wireless front, there was a very significant decision by the CRTC on what we call MVNOs, which are the mobile virtual operators. So these are, they were mandated, so they were allowed by the CRTC, meaning that a company can set up, without having a network in place, can set up a wireless operation, and incumbent companies need to open up their network so that these companies can use that wireless network, to become a wireless operator, a virtual wireless operator. Now that was mandated, but it was mandated in a fair way. What we were, to be honest, very worried about, and many of us were worried about, was that decision would have been a little bit too open, in the sense that just anybody could have plugged themselves on the network and just set up shop and off we go. This, in our mind, would have been very disruptive, and that didn't. The CRTC came up with certain rules. And the most important one of which, and I could go on for this for a long time, but I'll try to keep this simple. The most important of which is that a virtual operator needs to have a network, can operate, in areas where it has spectrum, but it needs to build a network within 7 years. So it will keep away the people who aren't serious about this, because if you're going to operate the network, you're going to have to, if you're going to operate a wireless business, you're going to have to build a network. And so you need to have the significant means to do it, and you need to have the strategy, the commercial strategy to succeed. And that's, yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's fair to assume that the CRTC's decision was based on not over affecting the incumbents in terms of their capacity to invest in their network.
Well, yeah, and that's important, because that they're needed, and I think we're very, we were fairly satisfied with the decision. So I think we're in a good position in that there needs to be an equilibrium between fostering and pushing for competition, which we very much believe in. Let's be very clear. I mean, we believe in competition. You know, we created that competition. If we, you know, if you look at how Quebecor built its wireless business, yeah, we were an MVNO for a few months, but then we built our own network in Quebec. You know, we invested more than $2.5 billion to build the network here, and started from scratch in 2010, and are now, you know, more than, you know, 20% market share in Quebec. So we believe in that. We played the fourth, you know, that infamous fourth player that needs to ensure that prices are, and competition is strong, and prices are you know, are kept under pressure. We've played that role, and we've played it, you know, successfully against all the incumbents and all the various brands which are already present in Quebec. So we certainly believe in that, and we believe that it needed to continue in English Canada as well, and anywhere. And I think that decision does that. You know, that yes, you need to, again, back to the equilibrium between having strong and healthy competition to make sure that a you know, a quote unquote cartel of a few companies cannot, you know, get away with unreasonable pricing strategies. But at the same time, you can't either go too far on the other side and allow anybody to surf anywhere, and then, you know, bring down, and then which would clearly disincent companies to invest in their networks. And I'm back to what I said earlier. Then you get back to networks that are not reliable, that are not well maintained, and that will you know, that will fail. So
yeah, and that are not, and this is a good segue into our second segment in terms of technology, that are not at the forefront of what the market is offering currently.
Very important as well. If you don't have, you know, if you don't have the means to invest in your network, not only just to maintain it, but to keep it on the forefront of technology, as you just mentioned, and to invest in, you know, 5G. Everybody talks about 5G. It's the big, you know, it's the buzzword. But at the end of the day, it will lead to new revenue streams, very important new revenue streams, both on the B2B side and on the B2C side. To be fair, they're not extremely concrete just yet. You know, there are many things are being thrown out in terms of possible revenue streams and possible new uses. The use cases are still, you know, a little bit theoretical, but we will get there. I mean, you know, I don't think we can afford to be naysayers at this point and say, well, no, 5G is never, you know, it's a big pie in the sky. It might be a big pie in the sky at this point, but I think it will become, you know, it'll come down to earth, you know, pretty soon. And there will be, I mean, people will be using more services when you talk about IoT types of services, when you talk about businesses. You know, the medical uses are very, you know, are very compelling. You know, in terms of automotive, you know, cars and things. I mean, these things will come and will need the technology, and the very small latency that will be needs to be attained. And we need to invest in network, and we need to invest in frequencies, you know, in spectrum, to make sure that we have these, you know, these this it's technology, or this you know, that we're able to offer these types of you know, of services.
Yeah. So just briefly from what you just said, you know, we acknowledge that the various technological advances are or may affect in the future the supply and demand for services provided by telcos. You mentioned 5G, you mentioned also IoT, there's cloud, or your transition of most companies and now even individual towards cloud, which, you know, affects the bandwidth for sure. So a few of those aspects, and one of the main impact that you mentioned is about the flow of investment, and where is that investment going towards in the next few years. That is very interesting. It raises two sub-questions for me, if you'll allow me. Is there a difference from your standpoint on the Quebec market than the rest of the Canadian market? That's the first aspect, and if so, what would be that difference, and why is so? And are there other impacts that could be foreseen from these technological advances?
Mm-hmm. To answer your first question, I don't believe in time that that Quebec will be any different than than anywhere else. I mean, there historically there's been a lag in Quebec in terms of adoption rates, in terms of penetration rates, for a number of reasons. Being a number of them being the catch up that is still happening today in terms of disposable income, in comparison to the rest of Canada or to certain other areas in Canada or elsewhere in the world. But more importantly, also due to on the content, and we'll get to the content side. On the content side, due to the language, which has both sort of the language both protects us and poses challenges as well in terms of offering offering content. But all of that to say that other than maybe some timing issues related to some of these challenges, I don't, we don't believe that, the Quebec market's any different from anywhere else. I mean, the needs for technology, for networks, I think the appetite for new advances and new technologies and new content will be just as strong as it is anywhere else in the world. And we as the prime, as the prime provider in Quebec need to be ready and need to be in a good position to offer that. I think we have many advantages, especially when it gets down to content, because the way, and maybe this is not the right time. I mean, maybe I'll wait for my comment on content until you get there. But we have a very—
Please don't steal my questions.
So I'll stop there. But I don't think, and your second question, so I don't think there's any, ultimately that Quebec will be, any different than any other market.
The other question was, aside from the imperative of investing in those technologies and the impact that this could have on telco in Canada, what other impact stemming from technology? And maybe, one of the impact is the opportunity created by these changes that you mentioned in terms of additional revenue streams that can come from 5G. Could you give us maybe a more detailed example of what you imply when you mention those revenue streams?
Well, on the two, our two big markets, as you know, are the consumer market and the business market. We're a lot bigger, and I'm talking about Quebecor now and about Videotron. We're a lot bigger on the consumer market than we are. We're building our B2B business and have been building it for many years, and it's growing. But not being national, of course, presents some challenges, of course, with larger companies. In terms of course, larger companies tend to work, tend to need, national networks and national services, which we're less able to offer other than in partnerships at this point. So we focus on the B2B side. We focus on the smaller and the PME, as we call them in Quebec, in the smaller companies where we have a dominant market share, and there will be significant advances there and significant revenue streams from there. Don't forget that some of the smaller companies tend to be some of the more innovative companies. And we have many clients in Quebec working on, medical services from, offering medical services from a distance, from home, which will become more widespread as we, over the next few years. But in order to do that, of course, you need very refined technology. I'm referring to, operations and other, medical procedures that could be done, or even on the monitoring and on the diagnostic side, where you need very refined technology to be able to diagnose from a distance and things. So there'll be some important revenue streams on that. But on the consumer side, which is our bigger market, there will be revenue streams associated with, more services. I mean, the obvious ones, which are starting to create new revenue streams for us, are security services, home, la domotique, I'm not quite sure how to say that in English. The, you know, like the connected home types of services, you know, where people can control, you know, lighting and temperature and humidity and, you know, all sorts of other things from a distance.
How do you price those services?
That is, I was actually going there. So your question is the right one, because, you know, and until these types of services become a must-have, you know, until while they are a nice to have, it is quite difficult, because, you know, there is a limit to how much people will pay, you know, every month for services, you know, and we're seeing it on content. You know, everybody talks about streaming services and the, you know, the limit, you know, are you going to have, how many streaming services are you going to be willing to subscribe to every month, you know? Well, the same thing goes for your home services. You know, your monthly bill comes, yeah, you'd like to have all of these services and all of these things. But at the, you know, at some point your bill will come and you'll say, you know what, maybe I need to cut something. So if you're cutting something to add something else, that doesn't help me very much, obviously. So we have to be careful. I mean, the way out of this is obviously bundling, and we've been very successful at you know, at bundling in the past. You know, offering wireless over, you know, internet and telephony services, and I think that will continue to be a, you know, the right way to, you know, to frame the pricing discussion. But there will be, I think we have to be realistic that there'll be, you know, there'll be the monthly bill fatigue type of thing, you know, that people at some point will not be willing to pay. So that's what I was referring to earlier as, you know, we have to be realistic in terms of use cases and revenue models going forward. But they are real, and they will. And as prices become more competitive on the basic services such as internet and wireless, then I believe that you know, these other types of value-added services will increase revenues for us, and there'll be good margin. You know, don't forget that our business, we are blessed with a business that, yes, on the negative side is a high investment, high capex business, but once you've got the network that is sturdy and that works well, it, you know, it is a fairly high margin business. So
yeah, until the next technology comes.
Yeah,
and the cycle kicks back again. But yeah, very, very interesting point. So we heard a lot about the need to strengthen the Canadian telco industry to sustain, you know, the investments in mostly technology that we already described today. Most notably in the context of the Rogers Shaw transaction that was in part presented to investors as a mean for Rogers to ensure its capacity to deliver on new technology and the investment required. And now I don't want to put you in a spot or whatever, and please, you know, response to this to the best of your capacity, but what is your position on the impact of the investment required to stay relevant in an ever more connected world, on competition on the Canadian market, especially again with what we were presented by Rogers and Shaw, which could have an impact on the competition level in Canada. So there's kind of a fine line and a balance to be struck here, where you have enough competition to provide to the consumer competitive prices that are comparable with G7 or G20 countries or other rich countries. So that's one side of the equation. But the other side is to give enough strength to the telco across the country to be in a position to invest in those technologies that are evolving fairly quickly. So where does that balance lens from your standpoint?
We've been quite clear. Our you know, we participated in a couple of government sessions, information sessions, where we were asked our position, our opinion, and we were very clear that in terms of the, you know, the Rogers Shaw acquisition. I think that balance that you're referring to is extremely important, and it needs that the competition needs to be, the level of competition needs to be maintained. And we've seen historically in Canada and elsewhere that that fourth player really plays a very important game on this, and a very important role, rather, I should say, in maintaining that competition and maintaining that pressure on prices. I think that should, on the wireless side, the operations of Shaw be allowed to merge with those of very strongly, that level of competition would become a problem in English Canada. In the markets, you know, they're mostly Ontario, Alberta, and BC, where these two companies would then be able to, we believe, play a pricing game that would be detrimental to, you know, to consumers. We've seen it in the past. We've seen, you know, force it to admit we have to admit that the track record of the fourth player in Canada has been spotty at best. And we've seen it cyclically that prices, you know, don't come down as strongly or as quickly and as strongly if the fourth player isn't as a strong and viable player. And I'll you know, the best example that we keep referring to is our own in Quebec. You know, we played that role, and we have invested a lot, as I said, and will continue to invest a lot in the wireless. And if you look at, and this is an ICED, you know, piece of data that I'm referring to, so this is not our own data. The only market in Canada where prices have actually come down more than 25%, which was that kind of benchmark that the government had you know, had given out, is in the province of Quebec. And the reason for that is that we played that role. We invested a lot and played a very strong fourth player role. Shaw is doing it now. You know, it took over from Wind, which was less well funded, and you know, there's a history, as I said, that is quite spotty. But Shaw was and is still to this day playing the role of the fourth player, and that role needs to be strengthened and needs to be encouraged. So on that, we believe very strongly, and you know, and at that level, I think we continue. We are right now in English Canada, and would continue to strike that balance that we referred to in terms of, you know, between competition and while leaving, I think, enough cash flow potential and investment potential to make sure that the networks are, you know, are maintained and are invested in.
So with that in mind, if I were to come to you and say, bonjour Hugues, I want to gamble on the likelihood of the transaction in the end, with you know, the competition level that is at the forefront of the CRTC's mission, what odds would you give me on that bet?
Odds that the
transaction goes forward after regulatory.
Oh, we I mean, you know, right now, to be honest, on the wireline front, on the cable, on the, you know, on the internet front, on the broadband front, maybe I should call it that. We really don't think there are any issues. I think this transaction should be allowed. I don't think I think the networks are there. The investments are going to continue, and I don't think there's any real threat on the wireline front. On the wireless front, as I said earlier, we believe that the fourth player, a strong fourth player, needs to be maintained, and for that Rogers needs to be forced to sell the wireless operations of Shaw, so that a strong operator, well-funded operator, can take over and really apply that competition, continue to apply that competition in these markets. I mean, you know, you're talking about big markets. I mean, Ontario is the largest and most, you know, is the deepest market in Canada, and Alberta and BC are very strong markets as well. So we don't think we can afford to really drop back to three main players in these huge markets. So We think, I think, the Competition Bureau and the regulatory authorities and the government, it would be surprising to us, to be honest, that they would go back on, how long has it been? At least 15 years of a very strong pro-competition position. And, whether it was the conservative government or the liberal government, I think they've been fairly even on that front. So I don't know what the odds would be. I'm not sure I can answer your question, but we certainly think that there's a strong chance that transaction should be allowed under the conditions that I mentioned. That a strong fourth wireless operator is maintained.
Yeah, quite interesting. So time flies. We still have a bit of subjects to cover. If you'll allow me, let's switch gear and talk about the evolution of the content strategies for telco. From the early 2000s, I was not very old, but I seem to remember Michael Sabia when he was at Bell. He really pushed for these integrated strategies to provide more content and have more proprietary content. And in the midst of the multiplication of streaming platforms and the increasing push towards original content, what are the main impacts for telecommunication service provider, and how does this affect your content strategies?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, quite simply, and that you're referring to Bell's strategy. Our strategy has been very content oriented for many years. I mean, don't forget that historically Quebecor started on the content side, started on the media side.
Yeah.
From newspapers to TV to internet, to magazines and all of the other media that we still have to this day. So content for us is actually at the heart of our business. And quite simply, for telcos to continue to grow and to be successful, they need to offer the content that people want, and they need to. I mean, otherwise you're a pipe, and anybody.
You become a commodity.
You become a commodity, exactly, and anybody can be one. I mean, we talked about MVNOs a little bit earlier, but there's on a regulatory front, you can be also a TPIA, which is sort of the broadband side of, or equivalent of an MVNO, which is a reseller. I mean, most of you must know some of these resellers where you can buy a broadband connection for a low price, but they run on either Bell's network or our network, which are the two big networks in Quebec. So anybody can provide a pipe, but if you want to provide it successfully and grow your business and grow your revenue stream, you need to offer the content that people actually want to consume, and on the platform that they actually want to consume it. So there are two main things. You need content. For us is a key differentiator, and especially I mentioned that I threw that in a little bit earlier, and I think it's time to bring it back up. The market of Quebec is slightly different because of language, because of a lot of people here consuming French language. I think the consumption will ultimately continue to grow on the non-French side, which is fine. But there is an element for us that distinguishes us from the rest of Canada and from other countries, is the fact that there's an opportunity if you offer differentiated local content, that you will win over. I mean, this is a huge strategy and has been hugely successful for us, because content is not only, let's not forget, content is not only videos and series and films and movies. It's also events, it's also sports, it's information, it's data, it's all sorts of things that people consume day in, day out. And you know what? People are interested in what's happening locally and what the local artists are doing, local music, local events, festivals, and things like that. And when and that's why our strategy has been very focused on building that local, that differentiated, that unique content. And you know, we're not alone in this. Of course, Bell is following the you know, the same strategy. And it really gives us more levers, obviously, to play on than price and service. You know, we've been historically, I think, able to provide very creative pricing and very, you know, very, you know, I think we've been a lot more agile in many ways than our competitors to find the right package and the right types of you know, of pricing and promotional strategy. But you know, at some point you need more than that, you know, and service has been a huge USP as well for us in terms of providing the best customer service. But that's one that's evolving over time. You know, years ago when we were we were very proud, and still are to this day at Videotron, to say that, you know, if you call us, we'll pick up the phone within 30 seconds, which is something Bell has never been able to do, or anybody else has been able to do. But increasingly, I think you'll agree, especially I think I'm talking to a younger crowd, that increasingly people do not want to call anymore. And that, you know, the definition of good customer service isn't necessarily, you know, answering the phone within 30 seconds anymore. It's having the right platform where you can find the information, the answer to your question, or being able to do it yourself, you know, whether it's picking the package that you're interested in, or having the installation done, or self-installing it yourself, or having access to all the various streaming you know, services directly from your, you know, directly from your phone, or from your home. So all of these are evolving, and we need to provide these customer service, and working very strong on this. But once you've got the pricing, going back to my argument, and then you've got the right pricing and promotional strategy and the right service levels, then you need to offer as well the content that people want to consume, you know, in a way that they want to consume it. People are, you know, not everybody consumes these things on the television anymore, you know. Increasingly it need, you know, we need to be able to offer it on phones, on monitors, on different various you know, in many different places within the home. So we need to have all of these various services that are packaged in a way that is affordable, and that is you know, easily used by the consumer. So all of this, you know, content is not simply buying or creating as much unique content and as much differentiated content. It is also providing it in the way that people at the right price and with the right service.
Very interesting. And this sparked a question from someone in the room. I'm going to read to you the question, Hugues, if you'll allow me. Sure. Speaking of content, your comments on Bill C-10. The bill subjects popular online streaming platforms to contribute financially to the CRTC, yeah, and mandates them to air a minimum level of Canadian content. So what's your comment on that, Bill?
Yeah, well, that's I mean, it is not an easy topic. You know, it is, of course, it makes sense. You know, it is, and we've said that publicly many times. You know, it is, and I agree with people who say that it is. I mean, it is unfair that certain world platforms, and we all know the strong ones, you know, can have access to more content without having to pay very much for it, or having to pay taxes, or having to pay other, you know, other more local types of fees. You know. That being said, it is it's, and as we've said as well, and our CEO has said that, you know, publicly, it is not as easy as to say we're going to tackle this and force people to align themselves. I think if you look, I think, at the evolution of this whole business, you know, we have to do it the right way, and it is a complicated matter, and is not as simple as just forcing people to pay. Otherwise, that content may go away. So I think there needs to be a negotiation. I think there needs to be some kind of some kind of deal, really, to be made. And we're seeing some countries in Europe that have already made some very interesting headways on this. So I think there's a path there, and I think there's flexibility on the side of some of these large of these large companies. And I think we need to continue to fight that battle, and I think we'll get there. But all I'm saying is that it's not black and white. You need to you need to be a little careful.
And it's an evolution. We need to adapt to new realities. So it takes time, as you mentioned, negotiation,
absolutely,
and goodwill from both sides.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's very interesting. Of course, it impacts us hugely. So of course we have, we'll always be part of that discussion and be part of that lobbying and all of that. But at the end of the day, fundamentally, we believe that there'll always be a role for a very strong content provider and services provider like we are, who knows his market or their local market very well. And there's a reason why Quebecor and Videotron and TVA are very successful, is that we keep year after year understanding what our market wants to see, wants to consume, and how they want to consume it.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. And I wanted to get to our last subject with that as a segue, because the last subject we wanted to cover was what's next, basically what's next for Quebecor and its subsidiaries. But one aspect that you mentioned when we had the discussion on content just now is the importance of knowing your local market, knowing what your consumers wants to be subjected to in terms of content. How does that, it protects the local players, for example, the Quebec market. But in terms of looking at what's next for Quebecor, does that kind of make it more difficult for Quebecor to extract itself from a Quebec dependency and then move towards the rest of the Canadian market, for example? Is that something of an issue?
Well, we need to, I don't think it necessarily makes it more difficult, but it needs to be done the right way. It needs to be done with our eyes open and clearly understanding that should we grow outside of our market where we are, which we know very well, are comfortable with, have been successfully, competing within, that it's going to be different, as we've said, publicly. For example, I'll take the example of the Shaw Wireless assets. Our CEO has been clear that yes, this is something we're looking at, because of course, strategically it makes sense for us, having been successful in wireless in Quebec, to be successful and to extend that the wireless services throughout Canada. That being said, as I said, we need to do it the right way, and the right conditions for our success need to be in place, because we don't have a broadband network outside of Quebec. So we'll have to have backhaul and other network types of agreements and roaming agreements and all of this. Otherwise, we won't be able to provide a business that's competitive. You have to have the right amount of frequencies, of spectrum, really, to be able to operate successfully, and having the right depth, to be able to offer especially with the 5G possibilities that we've talked about, which is going to be needing a lot of spectrum or added spectrum on various levels. I mentioned bundling before. It is that there's no denying that bundling in Quebec has been a huge bonanza for us. When we launched wireless, we had the advantage of being in a lot of people's homes through cable, already, and being able to benefit from that bundling opportunity, which we won't have in English Canada. So all of that to say that we believe we've got the track record, and we've got the experience and the expertise to be that successful, well-funded, and strategically important fourth player in English Canada. But that being said, we need to be realistic. It's going to be a tough, it's going to be a tough road. The three main players are not just going to sit there and be happy that we're there. They're going to fight back quite heavily, and but you know, we've fought them for many years, and we think we can be successful. All I'm saying is that we need to do this. You know, we need to analyze this properly and get the right conditions in place for us to be successful.
That is extremely interesting, and I think it strike a chord for one of the audience member. Mashfia asked, well, thank you for your reply. Ask if there's any acquisition or partnership opportunities on the radar. So this is
there always
potentially,
are.
Yeah.
There always are. I'm sure you'll understand that there's only so much I can talk about. But there always are. I mean, you know, we're a growing company. We've been growing and we'll continue to grow. And, you know, we still have quite a bit of runway in Quebec, though. I want to make sure I say that. You know, we're at on the wireless front at 22-ish% market share. I mean, there are four or five big players. So, but there's still a way to go. You know, we're fighting successfully on, you know, with Bell, our main competitor on the broadband side. But all of that to say that I think there's still penetration and there's still good revenue opportunities and revenue growth opportunities in Quebec. That being said, you know, clearly we are looking at the next step and the next growth engine for Quebecor going forward. You know, which may come from a number of different sources. So clearly, we are looking at you know, various opportunities, and so maybe I know we're almost running out of time, but maybe I'll leave you with that. I mean, you know, I would encourage you to keep watching us, because
I was about to say stay tuned.
Stay tuned. You haven't heard the last of us.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Hugues, for your time. I want to thank you personally for giving us a bit of your time, and I'll let Mathieu, if that's okay with you, Mathieu, with the closing remarks.
Merci, François.
Merci, François. Merci, Hugues. That was a super interesting interview. François, great questions and very insightful answers from Hugues. Thank you, members, to have been with us this morning. Stay tuned also for other YCIF events. We're coming with something big at the end of May. I'll keep the surprise, but you'll receive the invitation shortly. So have a good day, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you all.